Hello, this is Mike Van Meter, and welcome to the Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lillie podcast. And I want to thank you for joining me, and you can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, or our website, which is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. This podcast exists to educate the public about addiction, remove the stigma associated with addiction, and offer help and support to those suffering from addiction. Hey everybody, this is Mike Van Meter, and hey, good news for everyone. If I don't drink between now and Tuesday, today being Sunday, this Tuesday, August 12th of 2025 will be 13 years of sobriety for me. Big deal, big deal, big deal. Like any sobriety anniversary date, it is a big deal. But we have Lillie here tonight, and Lillie is my wife, and we're going to talk a little bit about what 13 years of sobriety has looked like. And so we'll start off this podcast with, again, reintroducing all of you to Lillie, and Lillie's going to be a permanent guest here on the podcast. But so Lillie, as I'm coming up on 13 years, what are your initial thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, Mike, congratulations on 13 years. It's absolutely wonderful, right? I was just thinking that 13 for us is actually a lucky number, right? It was a number that my son got when he started his journey in terms of playing hockey. And then at some point he couldn't get 13, so then he started using 31. But whether it's 13 or 31, it's always been a very good number for us.
Yeah, well, it is. And, but for those that are listening that are struggling, what can you say to them about just sobriety in general? What does that look like for you, for my sobriety? Because last week, if you haven't listened to last week's episode, please do that. Lillie talked a bit about the struggles in the beginning, and we really focused on getting into recovery, because if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably thinking about your need to get into recovery and your desire to recovery, and you're probably just having a hard time getting started, just like I did. But today we're kind of shifting the focus to, okay, I got into recovery, and 13 years is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that's quite a bit of time. What's changed? I mean, you look at your life now compared to the way that it was 13 years ago. What's different now? What's different now than what you were going through at that time?
I would say that for me, certainly the first several years, were really hard. I would even say, wow, we're coming up on 13. So I would say the first 5 to 7 years, you make a comment about the first 5 years and you phase through all of them. And I think looking back in time, you were dead on. And as we talked about last week, where it's not only you adjusting to your new way of life, it's your family adjusting to you as you gain your new life. You were so dependent on alcohol from the day I met you, and then having to all of a sudden switch gears, and now you're trying to live a life without alcohol, where in your particular case, you had told me stories like when you were 13 years old, your parents are having a party and you're sipping on people's beers, and maybe even before you were 13 years old. So alcohol has always been a part of your formative years. So now as you're approaching your 60s and the last 13 years, so, your late 40s going into your 50s, right? We're coming up now soon to be in our 60s next year. That transition takes a while. And like you were mentioning, for those who are struggling, it would be a disservice to sugarcoat it, to say, oh, it was a walk in the park for you, which it wasn't.
Oh, absolutely was not. Absolutely not. But go ahead.
And so having said that, there was a lot of like you and I were talking about last week, where it was like, hey, I've waited all this time for you to get into recovery. Now that you're finally going through the treatment centers, you've gone through all these detox, and now you've made a decision that you want to turn away from that and do a complete 180 and then live your life without alcohol. It's hard, right? Building out these new tools and trying them out, and that didn't work, do something instead. And so you had to really find out for yourself what works for you, for Mike, because what works for Mike may not work for Sam, may not work for Bill, right? It really depends on each person. And then and not only that, it's like just knowing that as you were trying to find your way. Well, the biggest thing I think for me that just comes to mind is you were very isolated early in your recovery and you didn't have any friends. And then I was really glad when you started making friends in the program, but even that was slow in coming, right? Who do you trust, especially as far as your recovery, right? And there were folks who slipped along the way as well as you slipped. So being able to stay with like what you would quote the winners, those who had a program that was working, and even if they slipped, there was still a strong desire to just pick up where you were before and keep pushing forward. And so seeing you go through that transition, but I think that when you started taking your recovery seriously, I had to busy myself with a different phase. Let you be you, focus on you and your recovery. And then for me to focus on readjusting myself with not constantly checking up on you, not constantly seeing what you're doing, and then focusing on myself, and then try to stay in my lane. Because if I was too overly concerned about you, it would create stress for me or anxiety for me, because each time you would slip, like we talked about last week, it made me even more anxious. But by recognizing that you were very serious about your sobriety, I needed to literally let you go and focus on getting myself well. Because then I really realized how I had been affected by your disease, and that I had been obsessing over you, and I needed to do something differently and to take better care of myself.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Now, how about the family? What do you, as you look back on the family, I talk about the family quite a bit at meetings, and how different our kids' lives were as a result of being sober. Our son was about 11, 12 years old when I got sober. Our daughter was about 8 or 9 at the time, and she doesn't remember a whole lot, but her son does. How would you characterize sort of their reaction, and maybe how different their lives were than what they would have been had I continued drinking?
So I'm going to just, actually, Christy was around 11, and then Michael was around 15. He was in his freshman year in high school. And then Christy was, because I only remember that because I was really concerned that when I went to the hospital with you, I was concerned about Christy's age. Yes, she's 11 years old. I could leave her alone in the home, but I couldn't leave her overnight. And that was the only reason why I'm able to remember Christy's age. And then Michael being in his freshman year, just knowing that he was going to go into high school, or was in high school, I was concerned about him, on you being present in his life, because you were drinking all the time. And kids, when they start entering high school, is when they tend to be very, very active with activities and things of that nature. So that's the only reason why I remember how old the kids were at that time. But I think that because the kids were younger still, relatively, and at the time that you became sober and took your sobriety seriously, you were able to not miss a lot of the kids' activities. So you were always there, not to all their activities early on when you were still actively drinking, but certainly as you were in recovery, you were more so there for Christy, right, from the age of 11 on. And then in Michael's case, from the age of 15 on, all throughout his high school years. So you were present. And so that is a blessing, that the children had you in their lives during their during those years where a father figure is very important for children, I believe. And so that to me is a blessing that you were there during those years.
So for those that are struggling right now, and I'm going to switch it a little bit because we talk about the person in active recovery that's struggling. But you and I both know that it's not just them. And in fact, the struggle seems to almost be more real and more difficult at times for the person that is the partner or spouse of someone that is still struggling. And you go to a lot of Al-Anon meetings, and one of the things that you notice when you go to an Al-Anon meeting is that it's oftentimes very sad. It really is. Because, let me just put this in perspective. For those that are coming to AA meetings, NA meetings, or any other 12-step meeting, that person has made the decision to get well. It doesn't mean that they are getting well. It means they made the decision. They have that desire to get well. And there's this striving. Everybody in that room is striving to get well, whether they've gotten sober or not. But the vast majority of the people in there are sober. That's why they're there. But when you go to, say, an Al-Anon or Nar-Anon or any of those types of meetings, that it's made up of the loved ones that are wanting their loved one to get well. And oftentimes, and in fact, I would say the majority of the time, and you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that the majority of the time, the person that's brought them there to the meeting actually has not gotten well. And sometimes doesn't even have a real desire to get well. So the suffering is still going on. So that active addiction, what are you seeing? And how can you encourage someone that is in that position? Because it's very difficult to watch, because I've gone to a lot of meetings with you, and it's a very, very difficult thing to watch. And sometimes there's anger, I've noticed, and sort of a bitterness towards those that have loved ones that have gotten well, because they want that so bad. Have you noticed that? That was like a weird dynamic. It's kind of like, I'm almost upset that you're married to a guy that's gotten well, because I want my guy or gal to get well, and they're not. And it's an interesting, it's a different dynamic than what you see in the 12-step meetings.
Well, everybody comes to the meeting, Mike, with different points, right? Some have been perhaps with a loved one who's been sober for a while. There are those whose loved one is still in treatment, or they just got out of treatment. And even like in my case, I will always say that being in the program has, there's no seniority, right? And so when somebody is having like a joyful moment, right? So like for me, it's 13 years of sobriety. There are those in the program, right? They will celebrate with me in that, because I'm happy about it. And then there are those who are still suffering because their loved one has not gone to treatment, is either in treatment, has just recently gotten out of treatment. And so they're still going through that very critical stage. And so it's not that I go to these meetings and I'm gloating, because by no means should you gloat, because that would make other people feel bad, and it's a support group, right? The meetings are for those who are at a point in their life where their loved one is doing well. That shows hope for those who are still suffering. And it paves a way that it's possible for them. So we talk about hope and healing, right? There's hope down the road for your loved ones, no guarantees. And even in your particular case, I cannot say, oh, you're healed. You have this disease of alcoholism that life circumstances can be such that you're not 100% cured from your disease. So we celebrate with others when we celebrate, but we also come alongside and support and and support one another when someone's going through a very, very difficult time. So that's the beauty of the meetings, is wherever you are, we're here to support one another. And I was just thinking about how early on in your sobriety, where I used to always love to go to the open AA speaker meetings, and then everybody would celebrate their anniversary. And I remember early on, you would hear all the guys and gals like laughing, and I would be upset. Just maybe not visually, but internally, I'm like, how could you guys be laughing and joking when your family members are suffering because you don't remember, all the destruction that the alcoholic or the addict had left behind, and then the family member is left to be able to pick up the pieces. And so how could you be laughing and joking, right? So that kind of irritated me. But then at the same time, when I went to my first Al-Anon meeting, I was in a room of individuals who were in Al-Anon, and a vast majority of them had long-term sobriety. When I say sobriety, meaning their loved one was either well and they were sober for a while, and they were in those meetings, or they were no longer with their loved one who was an addict, and they're now on their own, separated or divorced or whatnot, but they're able to live their life without the active alcoholism. And so in that meeting, and it was an Al-Anon meeting, they were all laughing, and I thought, wow, how could these people be laughing? I mean, I'm going through the lowest period of my life. I was not in a laughing mood. But when I came in, I was new, and then I shared a little bit of my story. It's not that it took away from their laughter, but they came up to me afterwards and put their arms around me and invited me to like dinner afterwards, and they were able to come alongside of me because they knew what I had been going through, and they could support me. And then as I've been in the program longer, it's we celebrate with others when there are good times, but we're also standing by and quick to come alongside those who are hurting because we've been there.
Yeah, very, very well said. And celebrating is important. Now, you mentioned that there is no seniority. And oftentimes when we hand out coins, and those of you that aren't familiar with 12-step groups, the 12-step tradition is to give mementos of various lengths of sobriety. And it's not to show seniority. It is meant to show that the program works. I mean, after all, we have to celebrate that. You want to encourage the person that has met that milestone, but then you also want to encourage the newcomer that's come in. And it's important. And I think in the early days, to be honest, I think that seeing people that are celebrating 1 month, 2 months, 3 months is actually more important than the 5 years, 10 years, my case, 13 years or 20 years, 30 years. Because if you've come in, like my early days of coming into sobriety, the guy that just picked up a 30-year chip, I mean, that I can't even relate to that, right? 30 years. I mean, there's a part of me that was like, that guy must have been lying. He was never alcoholic. How the hell do you pick up a 30-year chip? I mean, how does that happen? But even 13 years, if you're somebody that comes into, let's say you came to my home group next week when I pick up my 13-year chip, you might look at that and go, what? I mean, it's just too far, in the future. So I think it's important to see those milestones in the beginning of those early, though, because honestly, a 1 month chip, like you talked about last week, it was harder for me to get the 1 month chip than it is going to be to get this 13-year chip, to be honest with you. It's almost, automatic, we're in auto drive at this point. I've often told people that I work with now that the problem with early recovery is the difficulty is that it's early recovery. Everything's new. You're learning things. Your body, your brain, your mind, because the GABA levels are low, serotonin levels are low, melatonin levels are low, the B series of vitamins, everything's low. The neural pathways have been damaged, and you're fighting against that. And it's so, you're fighting that desire, that urge. You have that compulsion to drink. It's like that malware we talked about last week. Malware just takes over your brain, and it tells your brain to do things that you don't want it to do, and you're fighting that. But what happens after 5 years, which is the medical definition of long-term recovery, after that, when all of this is healed, it then begins to seem easy, right? And that's the difficult part about long-term recovery is that it's long-term recovery, and it's kind of easy. It's like when you're on a highway, when you're on a highway, in order to maintain this, if you're going at 60 miles an hour, you just have to tackle a little bit to maintain the 60 miles an hour. But if you come to a stoplight, you have to use a lot of fuel to get up to 60 miles an hour. It's kind of like early recovery, a lot of fuel, a lot of energy to get there, and then you maintain it. And again, so long-term recovery has its own challenges, because at the point that I'm at right now, I'm not going to near the number of meetings. If you remember in the early days, if you look at the early days, I was doing at least one meeting a day, sometimes 3 meetings a day. I don't do that anymore. I'm lucky if I hit a couple of meetings per week. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that to people. I'm just saying that I'm kind of in that equilibrium right now, where I also have a very good sense of when I'm feeling unstable, if I'm feeling out of kilter, if I need to have some more report. I can sense that now because I've had the experience doing it. In the early days, I didn't have that sense. It just needed to be all 12 steps all the time. And so maybe talk a little bit about how, from your perspective, am I different in my recovery from the first few years to now? What would you say?
Well, I would agree with you. Definitely in the early years, it was really important. Like you were saying, you needed to change everything. So what were those things going to be? And you did things that I never would have done, right? Like, oh, let me get up at 5 a.m. and teach a spin class, 5 days in a row.
By the way, I still do that.
Well, but I mean, twice a week, right? But I remember I was asking.
I do it a lot less than I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember asking you, why are you doing that? You're like, well, because it forces me to go to bed early, because I know I'm going to be getting up really early. So your old routine was to drink from 8 until midnight until you passed out. Well, you certainly aren't going to be up by 5 o'clock in the morning. So you were intentionally doing things to yourself to trick your mind, essentially. So I thought that was interesting, where you recognize that it's the disease that tells you that you don't have a disease, and you are putting things in place to protect yourself from yourself. And they weren't ideas that came from me. They were ideas that
I kind of set up my own lanes, like the bumper lanes when you're bowling. I set up my own bumper lanes. That was self-imposed.
So I have a question for you, Mike. Did somebody ask you to do that, or how did that idea come up?
So I think, you remember how you were just saying that recovery looks a bit different for everybody. And I think what happened was I had a counselor, I don't remember which one because I had so many, actually said to me at one point, hey, look, and he's saying this to everybody, and if you're listening, I think this applies to everybody, but he was talking to me specifically. Okay, so those of you that are listening and don't know my background, I was a Navy helicopter pilot, I was a police officer, I'm a retired FBI agent, I'm a therapist now. The only reason why I say that is I did have jobs that required an immense amount of discipline. I mean, to be a Navy pilot, I mean, just to get through flight school, it was, they wash a lot of people out. There has to be some semblance of discipline. And then, of course, as an FBI agent, a police officer, those kinds of things. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is this guy said to me one time, hey, recovery looks different for everybody, and how we approach it is different. What you want to do is, the thing about recovery is you figure you out. That's a big part of the steps, if you think about it. Step 1 of AA, I'm powerless over alcohol, my life's become unmanageable. That's step 1. That is the only time alcohol or drugs, if you're in NA or one of the other fellowships, that's the only time that substance is mentioned. It is never mentioned again in the rest of the steps. The rest of the steps is you working on you, if you think about it. So what this guy was telling me is you are going to go on a journey to figure you out, but you can be destructive. And so we know what the destructive habits are, but there's a point in your life, and he was saying to me, he goes, Mike, you had a lot of success in your life up to that point. By the time I got sober, you'd done all these things. What were the types of things that you were doing that helped you get that success? I mean, not everybody becomes a Navy helicopter pilot. Not everybody becomes an FBI agent. What were the things that you were doing right that led you to that success? Well, a lot of that had to do with leadership. A lot of the careers that I've had revolved around not just you being an employee, but you being a leader of employees. And so by doing that, if you're the person that is setting the example, then you're expected to set that example. And when you don't set that example, you're letting other people down and you're letting yourself down. So that's a long way of getting to. I then started putting in those bumper guards to keep me in that leadership position because it was important to me. It was important to me that I help others, lead others, but I don't want to let you down. Okay, so then what I did was I put myself intentionally into positions where I'm now that person that you will look at. And if, for example, I get up at 5 a.m. and I go, let's assume I would get up at 5 a.m. after drinking all evening. But B, certainly if I went into a spin class, you'd smell it on me. It would just be embarrassing as hell. And I didn't want that to happen to me. So that was like a self-imposed sort of like guarantee that I couldn't drink. You know why? Because it became important to me to not be that guy. The other thing that happened later on, which I still do to this day, is I had a sponsor at the FBI Academy. I started off teaching the course on addiction, but I wasn't talking about my story. I wasn't telling my story. In fact, I wasn't even telling people I was in recovery. I was talking about recovery, but didn't tell anyone I was in recovery. And then I eventually decided that I had to do that. And I had a sponsor say to me, but if you do that, if you're the guy that gets up and tells your story and you talk about recovery, then you damn well better be that guy. Because the day that you relapse after all the preaching, and even, by the way, even doing this podcast, I cannot be the person that is doing what I'm doing and then later on slip up. So I've really guaranteed that I can't relapse. I've created a situation where if I did, it would be very destructive to me and very destructive to other people. So it's kind of a force. The only way I can put it is I've kind of created an environment where I force myself to be sober. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But that's how I think, and that's what motivates me. I'm not saying that's how everybody thinks, but if you're listening to this, you will have to figure out those things that motivate you to accomplish. Like, I accomplished my goal. I'm assuming you want to accomplish that goal, but this is how Mike thinks. You're going to have to figure out how you think. And that's what I did, and that's why I did it. And I know that you were like, what the heck is he doing? But you're a different person. Maybe you're not motivated that way. I don't know. Maybe you are. But that's how I motivated myself. So it became self-motivation.
So let me ask you, Mike. So you got up at 5 a.m. and taught these spin classes. Is that same logic why you decided to become a therapist?
I think there's a lot of reasons why I became a therapist. I think it's one of them. I think it was, and I'm not, this is not a religious channel. This is not, and I don't mean to be preachy to other people, but I am a religious person, and my higher power, look, each person listening is going to have to determine what their higher power is, but my higher power is God. And when COVID happened, just let me back up a little bit. When I retired from the FBI, I went and I worked as a contractor at one of the other agencies here in the DC area. Didn't like it. Didn't like it at all. I mean, I just didn't like it. I really didn't. And I think that was pretty obvious. And also, I think part of the reason why I didn't like the job was by the time I retired from the FBI, I think recovery had become sort of my life. It became what I was known for, actually, both inside the FBI and outside the FBI. I was going around the country teaching, as you know, and people were calling me all the time and asking for advice anyway. And it was just on my mind, even when I was doing the contract work. And then, if you remember, COVID happened and everybody got sent home. That just blindsided everybody. We're all at home. and we're all locked in our houses. And what was happening is a lot of people were relapsing. There were a lot of mental health issues just started blooming up, from people that I knew, people around the country, addiction issues, relapses. A lot of people that I knew that had had years of sobriety, people that were sort of considered leaders in the recovery community here in the Washington, D.C. area, were relapsing. And I was getting phone calls, if you remember. People were calling me left and right, asking for advice, asking for me to teach, just conversations. And in fact, I think it was you that said to me at one point, hey, I'm listening to you on the phone. And, A, I know that you're not happy doing what you're doing right now. But B, really, it seems like the need is for recovery. And it seems like that's what God was laying on your heart. And then later God was laying it on my heart. And so while COVID was going on, I went back to school, went to Hazel and Betty Ford, and eventually got the degree that I have now. I think it was just sort of like a series of events that pointed to, this is what you need to be doing. So it wasn't, to answer your question, it wasn't necessarily another bumper, rail bumper per se. I think it was more, by then I was starting to think it was the calling, if that makes sense. I don't know, maybe you had a different perspective on it at the time.
No, I think that just you recounting what was happening before, because you had said that early on in your recovery, you were going to meetings like once up to 3 times a day, and you were trying to figure out what worked for you to live without alcohol. And then now that you're coming up on 13 years, there's a lot of things that you've put into place where those boundaries, those bumper rails are still there. So yes, you're not going to as many meetings as before. You're not going to the 5 a.m. teaching spin every morning, 5 out of the 7 days. You're now able to do it maybe once a week, but your profession is a constant reminder that addiction is there. Yeah, I think the difference now is I pretty much live recovery. I mean, I work in a hospital. I work 10 hours a day in a hospital and just whole recovery. What I do is different. I still sort of have those boundaries up, but it's different in the way that it's handled. I'm not doing spin at 5 a.m., but I'm working 10 hours a day in a detox unit. So, you could almost argue that I have more bumpers, because now I'm licensed through the state. I mean, I can't, if I relapse today, I can't work at the hospital. It wouldn't be ethical for me to do that. So now the state steps in, so that it's almost more regulation that I have now than before. But I think that it's different. Your recovery evolves, right? Have you seen that evolution over the years? What's the evolution that you see? Well, I think that, that's what I'm saying. The evolution is what you've set for yourself, and it's different for every person. And I'm curious just to know, you had mentioned that early on, well, not early on, but after COVID, there were individuals that you met or had known in the program for a while, and because they were isolated so much, they ended up relapsing. I'm assuming you're still friends with those individuals. They've gotten back on the wagon, and they're still moving forward in their recovery, even though they slipped or had a relapse. But I guess I'm curious to know, is that like we were saying, 13 years doesn't mean you've made it. It's one day at a time and stringing along many days that turn into years. But every day there are things that you put in place for yourself, whether self-imposed. What are those things that you're doing consciously, even though you're working in a hospital? What are those things that you're putting intentionally to help you? It could be physically, spiritually, emotionally, those facets of us as human beings to help you stay sober. You're talking about today or the early days? Both. Well, the early days, I think it was just like, I always tell people that first year in recovery,
I just went militant. I mean, that's the only way I can kind of describe it. You know, you heard last week, you know, at the end, it was like I had two options: get well or die. That was it. Get well, die. And I decided, along with you, if you remember that I had a lot of recovery in my head. I was that guy that by the time I got sober, I probably could have taught a master's level class on sobriety. I mean, I knew the big book. I knew the 12 and 12. I knew, as Bill sees, I knew all the, there probably wasn't a movie on recovery that I hadn't seen. Most of the books that are out there, I had read them. It's funny, later I ended up getting a master's degree in addiction and co-occurring disorders, but I actually felt like most of the studying and most of the stuff I learned was before I started the master. The master's degree was just kind of like, okay, now we're just going to certify what I already knew. Because, I mean, I had done that much study. I was that guy. The problem was I hadn't put into practice what I knew. So what I decided to do in the early days was just say, that's it. I'm going to do whatever they tell me to do. I'm going to get a sponsor. And whatever he tells me to do, no matter how stupid I think it is, I'm just going to listen and we're going to try. And if you remember, we worked with a doctor. Ironically, he's the doctor that I work for today. And went on MAT, or what they call medically assisted treatment, MAT. And if you're not familiar with that, there's a lot of, depending on what drug brought you into recovery. In my particular case, it was alcohol. So I was on Camprol, GABA, megavitamins, and some other things to help sort of stabilize, trazodone just stabilize my sleep and then get the GABA up and all these different things. Camprol is something that helps with cravings. If you're using heroin or fentanyl, it's going to be Suboxone, methadone, things like that. But anyway, medically assisted treatment, and I did that for a year, if you remember that. And so I took that advice, even though about 6 months in, I thought, oh, well, I'm good now. I don't need to be on the medications. And the doctor said, nope, we're going to keep, I don't care how good you think you feel, you're going to stay on it for a year. I was going to the meetings, I got the sponsor, I'm working the steps, and whatever things I was told to do, I did. And I didn't question it. And I think that's a key. I stopped questioning and started listening. I think that was the key. That was the early days. Today, I think what happens is you realize the culmination of step 12, having had a spiritual awakening, we carry the message to those that continue to suffer from alcoholism. That's step 12. By the way, you notice that, I know you in the audience can't see us. I don't have any of this written in front of me. You notice I did step 1, step 12, just off the top of my head. I'm not bragging. What I'm telling you is that's just how well I know it. And so that's an important part, is knowing the program, knowing recovery, knowing the disease, okay, knowing it. And with step 12, that culmination, remember there, it says carry the message to those that continue to suffer from alcoholism. And that's really the key. What I do today is, in the early days, it was me really working on being selfish, actually. Going to a meeting. If you wanted to do a family function and it conflicted with the meeting, I went to the meeting. It sounds kind of selfish. I kind of had to be selfish in the beginning. Today, it's the exact opposite. We are never selfish. It is always, what do you do to help the other person? And if somebody's in need, then you help them, because I stay sober today by helping you stay sober today. That's why, part of the reason why I work at the hospital is it's sort of an outgrowth of recovery. Now I'm helping other people get well, but guess what? It helps me as much or more than that person. But that's how we do it. And you just become devoted to helping those. I mean, Lillie, as much as I do, people call in the middle of the night, and they do, and they call in the middle of the night. I will pick up the phone. I don't screen those calls. I pick it up and I help those people. So in the early days, it was focused on me. Now it's focused on everyone else. It's sort of that cycle, but in helping other people, it helps you. And that's where I'm focused right now. Doing this podcast is an outgrowth of step 12, if you think about it. And I'll give you the last word on all of this. So anyway, that's how I kind of look at it today. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, that's great, Mike. Just thinking about you speaking and talking about your sobriety, the early days, then where you are now, you've really matured in your walk, and your walk in the merry road towards recovery. And I think that it's encouraging. It's encouraging to me. I'm hoping that it's encouraging to those who are in early sobriety, that you don't have to do it alone. Mike and I are here to come alongside of you, to encourage you, to provide hope, and but we're not saying it's easy, but you have to want it, right? You have to want it, but you don't have to do it alone. And that's the biggest thing is like you were saying, Mike, I like to continue to go to the meetings because it keeps me aware of the disease. Because it's so easy to be deceived. And there's a lot of hurting people out there. And so it's terrible if you have to go through this alone. And that's why it's important for us to stay in community with others and to support others whenever we can.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so if you need to reach out to us, VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com, we'd love to hear from you. And that's what it's all about. So, please, as we always like to say, we don't represent any group and we don't represent anyone other than ourselves. And our only purpose in giving this information is to share with you what we've learned about recovery, because it's helped us and maybe it'll help you too. So as we've said, if we've said anything that doesn't apply to you or you don't agree with, then just discard it. But try to take any information that you can use for yourself and help others as well, because that's what we do in recovery. We help ourselves along the way, and we help to impart our knowledge that we've gained to help others as well. And so, as we mentioned, reach out to us at VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. That's a website. The Facebook page is Recovery is Possible. Let us know how we're doing, and let us know if there's a topic that you're interested in hearing about it, because we'd love to hear about you. And you guys, you take care of yourselves. Recovery is possible. So this is Mike and Lillie from Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lillie. Spread the word, send it out far and wide, because you can get well, you're worth it, and we will talk to you next week. Thank you so much.